Welcome to WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. Got a couple of court-related things today. I guess hearing-related things today. We are looking at former Vice President Mike Pence being subpoenaed. Yes, indeed, to testify in front of a grand jury. We have Glenn Kirshner talking about that, as well as an article from CNN we're going to look at, and then, of course, what you can do about it. Then Bo of the Fifth Column discussing how GOP hearings have backfired regarding Twitter and bias versus left or right wing. Surprising nobody on the left, it turns out there is a bias, and it is against the left wingers. It is in favor of right wingers. So GOP is having to deal with the fact that they now have the ability to investigate their wild claims, and unfortunately that involves putting people under oath where they are legally required to tell the truth. It does not work out in their favor. And then Tennessee Democrats just crushing hearing on the transgender youth ban. Unfortunately, facts, logic, reality has almost no bearing on what the GOP does, which means it looks like that transgender youth ban is going to power ahead, but the ACLU is on it. We will, of course, tell you what you can do. Delighted to be back live with you. You may have noticed we haven't been able to do that last couple of days. I wish I could tell you specifically what's wrong. But it turns out that when you run a whole lot of things off a, let's call it a venerable computer, random stuff can go wrong. I'll give you a little, while we let the audience gather up here, I'll give you a little insight. There is just a cluster of cords going between this desk and the computer, and I kid you not, when I step over those cords, no contact made, step over those cords, everything shuts off. If you are a tech person in the audience or an exorcist, do let me know what on earth could be causing that. But figuring it out was that took some investigating. Seems to be that I at least understand what causes a random shutdown of all the stuff I'm working on. So we're going to power through with these live streams and just not step over there until it's figured out. Well, let's get right into our big stories. So Mike Pence has been subpoenaed to testify in front of a grand jury regarding January 6th and all he knows about the election tampering, the attempt to steal an election. Let's look at this article from CNN. Former Vice President Mike Pence has been subpoenaed by the special counsel investigating Donald Trump and his role in the January 6, 2021. In January 6, 2021, a source familiar with the matter told CNN. Should say this was first discussed in ABC News. They're the ones that broke this, but I liked CNN's coverage a little bit more. Special counsel Jack Smith's office is seeking documents and testimony related to January 6th, the source said. They want the former vice president to testify about his interactions with Trump leading up to the 2020 election and the day of the attack on the U.S. Capitol. Ooh, boy. The subpoena marks an important milestone, my God, it's about time, in the Justice Department's 2-year criminal investigation, now finally led by the special counsel into the efforts by Trump and allies to impede the transfer of power after he lost the 2020 election. Pence is an important witness who has detailed in a memoir, so he was willing to publish this stuff rather than talk to the January 6th committee. Wild. Pence is an important witness who has detailed in a memoir some of his interactions with Trump in the weeks after the election, a move that likely opens the door for the Justice Department to override at least some of Trump's claims of executive privilege, because we know he will do anything he can to keep the truth away from the American people. He has made that clear. I'm delighted that Pence was greedy enough to publish about it. Pence's attorney, Emmett Flood, is known as a hawk on executive privilege, and people familiar with the discussions have said Pence was expected to claim at least some limits on providing details of his direct conversations with Trump. Depending on his responses, prosecutors have the option to ask a judge to compel him to answer additional questions and override Trump's executive privilege claims. Pausing there for a second. So, this essentially means they know damn well that Trump is going to try to stop the truth from coming out in any way he can. The way he is most comfortable doing that is by asserting executive privilege, which just means pretending like those conversations were somehow important to national security, or that secrecy surrounding those conversations needs to be maintained in the interest of the nation's security. That seems like an insane argument to you. It's because it is. It's nonsensical. And by the way, thus far, just about every one of those claims has been thrown out by judges that have got them. Interesting point, though, the delay tactics generally have a reason. Now, I've been saying it's mostly because that's just how cover-ups work in the USA. They wait for you to get bored. I think that might still be the case here, but it's worth noting that there is a new judge coming in March to that area. But don't worry, we'll get to it. Months of negotiations preceded the subpoena to the former vice president, CNN has reported. Justice Department prosecutors had reached out to Pence's representatives to seek his testimony in the criminal investigation. According to people familiar with the matter, Pence's team had indicated he was open to discussing a possible agreement, with DOJ to provide some testimony, one person said. That request occurred before the department appointed Smith to oversee 2 Trump-related investigations, the January 6th related probe and another into alleged mishandling of classified materials found at the president's Mar-a-Lago residence. Bear in mind, the primary issue with that was the obstruction of justice, the refusal to return the documents, an absolutely wild thing for him to have done. We would never have heard about it if he had just given them back. There are no plans for Trump's team to challenge the grand jury subpoena of Pence at this time, according to a source familiar with its thinking. I don't know who that source is, but I wouldn't count on anything they say, either because they are on Trump's team or because Trump's team is simply not predictable. Even Trump's team doesn't know what Trump's team is going to do. They are pure chaos. So far, Trump's team has lost those challenges when Pence's deputies and 2 White House counsel's office attorneys testified following Chief Judge Beryl Howell's ruling that they must answer questions they initially refused to because of confidentiality around the presidency. Again, that was Trump trying to pretend like somehow discussing this was important to national security, when in fact, it is in the interest of national security that it's being pursued in the first place. It's an absolute nonsense argument. Howell's tenure as chief judge of the D.C. District Court ends in mid-March, meaning a different federal judge, James Boasberg, could be the one to field privilege disputes in the continuing grand jury investigation. So, I wouldn't sweat that all too much. Boasberg, I'm saying that name correctly. Yeah, Boasberg is an Obama appointee, so I don't think it's part of a strategy to, kick this down the line. There have been some Trump-appointed judges who have just utterly flouted the law, made a mockery of their profession to back up Trump. This guy I think he was appointed, Boasberg, in 2011. So he's an Obama appointee, is the point. So it's unlikely that this guy is going to run cover for Trump. Valerie Fisher, y'all hit the like button to elevate his exposure. Ooh, thank you, Valerie. Yes, please. Lord knows I do appreciate likes. Let's have a look at what Glenn Kirshner had to say about it. Because if you're looking for a legal breakdown, the guy who's on the legal breakdown is the absolute best. Here he is.
Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, as you now know, Special Counsel Jack Smith, the prosecutor who has been appointed to investigate the crimes of Donald Trump, both the insurrection and the Mar-a-Lago documents crimes, has now served a federal grand jury subpoena on former Vice President Mike Pence to testify to the grand jury about the insurrection, in a very real sense, to testify about the democracy-busting crimes of Donald Trump. And what can Mike Pence bring to the table? Think about it. Donald Trump pressured Mike Pence relentlessly to try to convince him to corruptly throw the election to him, to Donald Trump, notwithstanding the fact that he lost the 2020 presidential election. He pressured Mike Pence, trying to convince him to violate any number of federal laws, violate the Electoral Count Act, violate the federal statute that makes it a crime to obstruct an official proceeding, the certification of Joe Biden's win. In a very real sense, friends, Donald Trump tried to enlist Mike Pence as a co-conspirator in his criminal scheme to commit crimes against the United States, to defraud the United States.
So one thing that I really want to stress here about what Kirshner is saying, Mike Pence is now faced, or at least in that scenario, Mike Pence is then faced with either throwing Trump to the wolves or getting eaten by the wolves right alongside him. We have learned a lot about Mike Pence. He is not a brave man in the face of the machine, I suppose. He is he is super far right. But let's be generous and say he has a respect for the status quo. When he is faced with either getting charged himself or testifying against, I don't think that's any question at all as to what he's going to do. Let's also not forget, though, he is testifying as a victim, theoretically, as well. As a victim. This guy Bob Woodward was talking about Mike Pence entering the room. Should have pulled that clip. Was talking about when Mike Pence entered the room while Bob Woodward was interviewing Trump. And apparently Mike Pence came in the room and stood there for 45 minutes. This dude, I don't like him, but you can't deny that he was a victim as well. He was more or less partnered with a crazy man for 4 years, and it culminated in an actual, I don't like the word, but it is fully accurate here, an actual lynch mob going after him. He's going to be testifying as a victim as well as someone that Trump attempted to rope into the conspiracy. Now, for the record, I believe that Pence absolutely would have gone along with it if he felt there was a legitimate enough looking path, but he was told time and again, flat out, none exists, you can't do it.
And to Mike Pence's credit, he's no hero, but to his credit, he resisted. He refused to join Donald Trump's conspiracy, a conspiracy that so many others had joined. John Eastman and Rudy Giuliani and Jeffrey Clark from the Department of Justice and so many others. Mike Pence refused. So because Mike Pence refused to join Donald Trump's criminal conspiracy, Donald Trump converted him into a victim, right? When Mike Pence was at the Capitol trying to certify Joe Biden's win, and it became clear to Donald Trump that Mike Pence was not going to do the wrong thing, was not going to help Donald Trump criminally, unconstitutionally retain the power of the presidency, Donald Trump tweeted out, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what had to be done. And that inspired Donald Trump's already angry, enraged mob to begin hunting for Mike Pence and to begin chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." In a very real and direct sense, Donald Trump converted Mike Pence from what he hoped would be a co-conspirator to a victim. And when that crowd was hunting for Mike Pence and chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," Donald Trump did nothing.
Shouldn't have doubted Glenn Kirshner. My word. Yeah, right on the ball. I wholeheartedly agree. I get hit with waves of it sometimes. The realization, my God, this was the United States of America. I don't know about you, but growing up, like the one thing that we were still clinging to as something we could be proud of about being American was the peaceful transfer of power. So many of those things that we used to tout were falling out of favor. Like, for example, our military might didn't seem like such a thing we could boast about after it became clear that we got suckered into using it foolishly time and again. We had Vietnam in the rear view mirror as a great shame. Then we had the Gulf War. We had conflicts we couldn't really be proud of, and then Iraq and Iran. It just became an embarrassment. Our economy was clearly tanking. Even when I was in my teens, it was just obvious to those of my generation that we were not going to be going into the same economy our parents enjoyed. One by one, those things that Americans could be proud of evaporated. But we held on to the fact that we were a democracy, and we had the peaceful transfer of power, and by God, in 250 years, that hadn't been shaken except for, those couple of dozen times. But the myth was there, and now, gone. And I am at least grateful for one thing, which is that we are not lying to ourselves about what we are anymore. And hopefully, we're going to deal with it. Let's let the man continue.
He did nothing to tell them to stand down. He did nothing to protect Mike Pence and his family and everybody in the Capitol that day. So does Mike Pence have some powerfully, sharply incriminating testimony to give to the federal grand jury about Donald Trump's crimes? You bet he does. So what happens moving forward? What are the implications now that Mike Pence has in his pious little hands a federal grand jury subpoena? Well, first of all, he can try to fight it. He can try to claim executive privilege, and he will lose. Donald Trump's democracy-busting crimes will cause every single judge who has to resolve a Mike Pence claim of executive privilege to deny the executive privilege claim and order Mike Pence to testify. About that, I am certain, and I'm not going to waste a lot of time discussing executive privilege. If we start to hear concretely that Mike Pence is trying to play the executive privilege card, coward that he is, he might, we'll deal with it then. He will lose, and he will be ordered, he will be compelled to testify before the grand jury, and hopefully he tells the truth.
I'll jump in on that, actually. I don't think he's going to. I firmly believe that Mike Pence wants to wash his hands of this efficiently. That meaning he's going to want to get in there, say everything needed once, and get out. It's very likely, in fact, that he might insist upon, and I'd have to look at the actual legality if this is even allowed, but if it is a possibility, he might insist upon it simply being taped and played in front of the grand jury or not released to the public in general. But the point being, he's going to want to make as little as a ripple as possible because he is still under the belief that it's possible for him to be the president. I think no one on God's green earth is going to vote for that guy. But he doesn't think that, so
Hopefully he doesn't shade and fudge and equivocate and try to give Donald Trump an out. Hopefully, for once in his life, Mike Pence is a stand-up guy, maybe the second time in his life. Because after all, he did refuse to join Donald Trump's conspiracy. So what does it mean that somebody as high up on the food chain, somebody as influential and connected and privileged as a former vice president of the United States has now been subpoenaed? Well,
just so you know, the link to the full clip is in the description. Highly recommend you check it out. We're going to play this part, but not the whole thing, because, you know, it's Glenn Kirshner. He deserves a watch all his own. But this is key. What does it mean that Mike Pence was subpoenaed in terms of the timeline? Have a listen.
We can tease out a few things from the fact that Jack Smith, special counsel, has now reached up that high and subpoenaed Mike Pence. We can certainly infer from that Jack Smith is moving toward concluding his investigation. Not that Mike Pence will be the last witness, but when, you know, I was a federal prosecutor for 30 years, when we are running large-scale grand jury investigations of conspiracies or of criminal organizations or enterprises, we generally start with the lower-level witnesses, right? The less important, the less critical, but witnesses who nonetheless have bits and pieces of relevant information, incriminating information about the targets of the investigation. And we try to go through all of those lesser witnesses first. Why? Because before we approach the big ticket witnesses, guys like Mike Pence, who had direct conversations with Donald Trump in which Donald Trump urged him to violate the law, we want to have as complete an understanding of the picture, of the evidentiary landscape as we can have. We want to know from all of those lesser witnesses, for example, what conversations did you have with Mike Pence? What do you know about Mike Pence and his interactions with Donald Trump or others? Because that makes us better prepared to fully question, to thoroughly examine Mike Pence in the grand jury if we know everything that everybody knows about Mike Pence and his interactions.
Okay, so they're working their way up. You generally don't subpoena the target. And who are they talking to? The vice president. Why don't you subpoena the target? Why? Because they complete the fifth. They're talking to the vice president of the United States. Ooh, boy, folks. An indictment might be coming. Now, this is leaked information. So we got a while. This is leaked information, so big fat grain of salt. They still have to get the guy to testify. They still have to do a lot of work. But the stage they're at, if they're going after Trump, you can't imagine a better sign than the vice president being subpoenaed to testify. This guy testifies. I fully expect, following that, we just saw this with Fani Willis, the district attorney in Fulton County. They testify, and bearing in mind that Georgia's grand juries work a little differently, yada, yada, yada. But the point is that the testifying then is followed by going up the ladder further, issuing indictments against people that the court finds have an indictment coming. In other words, Jack Smith appears to be on track to issuing an indictment on Trump, assuming he doesn't just let the man go. To me, this is very exciting news. I don't think it means Monday morning expect to hear that Trump's in handcuffs. No. We don't live in a system that is that just yet. But great news. This essentially means we can expect Trump directly to be the next person in the line, however they're going to approach him. But if they're working their way up the chain and they're at Mike Pence, I mean, it's got to be Trump next. Now, what alarms me is that they might try to pin this all on Rudy Giuliani. They might try to pin this on Eastman. This is possible, and it would be disappointing. But I do think that Merrick Garland and Jack Smith and the whole of the Justice Department seems to be aware of the fact that the American public is a hell of a lot more savvy than it used to be. This is not the Nixon days where a blatant crime can get committed and the next president can give the last one a pardon for the sake of, I don't know, protecting the powerful. Let's not trust that, though. That's me thinking that. There's a link in the description to contact the DOJ. If you are from any of the states that did not have a false elector plot, I would recommend just writing the DOJ and saying, just so you know, I'm expecting charges against Donald Trump. Just to put pressure on them, purely so that they know we're watching. If you are, however, from one of these states, let me throw this up here for a second. You're from one of these states: Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin. Then the false elector plot happened in your state. That's where they tried to get electors that were not any sort of official. They tried to get a group of just randos to pretend like they were your state's electors and to send in votes that were not who you voted for. These are all states that went for Biden, and the GOP, including the state-level GOP in these states, as in the representatives working near you, people who live near you, they tried to send in phony electors. In Georgia and Michigan, there are state-level investigations into this. In Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, there are not. Let me tell you what's going to happen if it's left up to Merrick Garland. He is going to get as few people that were involved in this as he can get away with going after. He is not going to go after people who tried to undo your vote that don't make a lot of headlines to begin with, that aren't easy to get, and he'll allow them to run free. I don't think we should let that happen. I think if you live in one of those states, you should use the link in the description to contact your attorney general and say you want a state-level investigation into 2020 elector fraud. Even a script that you can use if you so choose. There will be no harm at all, in running an investigation at a state level at the same time that the federal investigations are happening. These were state-level crimes as well as federal crimes. It's possible that the same thing, the same crime spree can cover both. Don't let them get away with anything. Let's not only cover our bases, let's cover every base we can possibly cover. Let's make sure this guy does not get away. Because, boy howdy, we did not see Merrick Garland making very much progress until it was clear that others were. Until the January 6th committee happened. If you remember early days, Merrick Garland seemed caught off guard by information the J6 committee got. That shouldn't have been so. Truly, it should not have. He should have had surpassed anything they were able to do within the first weeks of his investigation. Before the committee was even formed, he should have been past where they revealed they had gotten. So don't rely on him. Contact your state's attorney general. Get after it. Get those state charges filed if you live in one of those states. If you don't, contact the DOJ. It does not hurt just to remind Merrick Garland that the American people watch this now, and that the old ways of letting every president go that commits a crime. And by the way, since Nixon, every Republican president has committed a crime while in office. I welcome a lawsuit from any of these fools. Nixon, Reagan, Bush Sr., Bush Jr., Trump. I welcome them to sue me over saying they committed crimes in office, because you know what? Most of it's a matter of record. Watergate and the Chenault affair. That was both Nixon. Iran-Contra, that was that guy. That was also his vice president, George H.W. Bush, involved in Iran-Contra. George W. Bush lied to the American people. Got us into 20 years of war, wherein 7,000 American soldiers died, as well as 8,000 contractors and an unknown number of people in the Middle East. And Donald Trump has committed did commit so many crimes while in office that to list them all here would literally take hours. Zero accountability so far. We got to change that. State-level charges. Attorney General in Michigan, Dana Nessel, listed as one of her reasons for pursuing state-level charges, because it has taken so long for federal charges to come as a result of Trump's election tampering. Pressure from her constituents. Use that as a template. Pressure your attorney general. Valerie says, that was a favorite Glenn show ever. That was my favorite Glenn show ever. Known who this monster is since I was a kid. Oh, Valerie, I assume you are a New Yorker, or at least were paying attention more than I. I had no idea Trump was as bad as he was until the Obama years, when he started pushing those ridiculous birtherism lies. But kudos to you for staying ahead of the game, because my God, you're quite correct. He was terrible. Well, Beau of the Fifth Column recently reviewed or gave his assessment of the GOP Twitter hearings. These hearings were the result of the conspiracy theory that the GOP was pushing that was the exact opposite of the truth. People on the left for a long time have known that there is a right-wing bias in social media. It's not a secret. It's not a conspiracy. It's just a known fact. There's testimony from Facebook executives already. There was already testimony from executives at various companies essentially saying, yeah, we skew things towards the right wing. And yet it was a conspiracy theory because every accusation is an admission with the GOP that, in fact, there was a left-wing bias. Well, the dog caught the car and doesn't know what to do with it, because the GOP has now been holding hearings in the House regarding media bias, and the answers they're getting are incredibly embarrassing. Here's Beau of the Fifth Column talking about it.
Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Beau again. So today we are going to talk about Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives and their show and how things are going. And we're going to talk about believing your own stuff and how they certainly should have known that this is how it was going to go. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm not surprised because nobody watched it. But they held their first hearing This one was part of the series that is apparently going to be trying to pin something on Hunter Biden. I don't actually know what they're really trying to look into here. But the first hearing was supposed to showcase how Twitter was like at the command of the Democratic Party and how they, censored everything to help him and all of this stuff. And that's what they told people they were going to see. What was the testimony? I am aware.
Real quick, I think Bo has allergies of some sort because he's a sniffling in this. I sincerely hope it ain't COVID, but he doesn't address it, so I assume he just sneezed before the take. Anyway, yeah, the Twitter hearings are part of a series, and I gotta say, I'm looking forward to more embarrassment for the GOP coming out of this.
Of no unlawful collusion with or direction from any government agency or political campaign on how Twitter should have handled the Hunter Biden laptop situation. That's Twitter's former deputy counsel. Testimony very, very similar to that came from a whole bunch of people. This was very surprising to a lot of Republicans, particularly those who have been asking me since the, quote, Twitter files came out why I wasn't covering it. And this especially goes out to the person who was down there for 2 weeks saying day 20 whatever of Bo covering up the Twitter files. This is why I didn't cover it, because I read it. So they believed that they were going to get all of this information about how Twitter censored the Hunter Biden laptop story. That's what Republicans believed. Why? Because a whole bunch of right-wing commentators said that was true, and the Republicans in Congress believed them. It is worth remembering that the person who put the Twitter files out said, there is no evidence that I've seen of any government involvement in the laptop story.
Okay, so I really need to point out the fatal flaw that MAGA has is that they have been demanding truth. They could have skewed their nonsense a lot of ways. They could have kept it to culture. They could have kept it to things that were not provable. But they have been demanding truth. And the problem is, enough of them got elected doing that they are now expected to go out and seek truth. I am sure, mark my words, I am sure they will find a way to pretend to do that in a way that doesn't actually involve them, doing it. But thus far, they hadn't figured it out. And this Twitter hearing is going to continue being an absolute embarrassment for them because of it. Because even though, as Bo just said, it was already stated that there was no left-wing bias. In fact, there was a right-wing bias. Their worldview is dependent upon that not being the case. And so they've just said that isn't the case. And now here they are in full control getting this put on the record. It's delicious.
Why couldn't they find it? Why didn't anybody at Twitter admit it? Because there's never been any actual evidence to suggest that occurred. They made it up. They got caught in their own propaganda feed, and they believed it. So, how is a hearing supposed to run? If you were around during the sixth hearings, you remember me saying a certain phrase over and over again.
Oh, yes.
Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them, right? What has happened on day one of the Republican hearings? Tell them what you're going to tell them. Oh, no, that's not what anybody said. This is going to be repeated over and over again.
I fully expect the hilarity to continue. There again, full clip in the description. Part I wanted from that was stated Yeah, they don't. It's just like when a lawyer with a bad client has to try to present a case in court. Eventually, the thing that makes a client bad is that the facts don't bear out what they're saying. The facts don't bear out their case. And as a lawyer, you got to just try your best to represent them with what you do have. Unfortunately, in this case, the lawyer and the client's the same person. It's the politicians that said all this nonsense that now have to try to prove that with people under oath. The issue being, they're gish-gaveling. They're stalling for time, and their ranting doesn't translate well to this, because they ask somebody a question, they got to let them answer the question, and the person legally cannot lie. I mean, they cannot win with this strategy. All they can do, in the best case scenario, nobody pays attention. Why we're talking about it. In the best case scenario, nobody pays attention. So what can you do? Take advantage of that fact. My God, take advantage of that fact. If you have people in your life that are MAGA fiends, if you run across such people out there in the wild, be ready to show them Bo's clip, link in the description, or just remember the simple fact that the hearings showed a massive right-wing bias. In fact, just remember the fact that Twitter literally, these hearings have shown, Twitter literally changed their terms of service to accommodate Donald Trump's hate speech. They changed their terms of service for the sake of accommodating Donald Trump. That is how far they went in terms of their right-wing bias. If you remember that, you can drop that on them. It's a matter of public record now. It is not up for debate. They can Google it. You can Google it in front of them. That is how to shut them down. That is how to wake them up. That is how to bring them a little bit closer to reality. Only thing we can't do is ignore them. If somebody is out there ranting and raving, I encourage you, unless they're dangerous, we do know a hell of a lot of MAGA folks are, but if they're not dangerous in your estimation, or it's not a dangerous situation, do correct them. Do point out that MAGA got to run hearings now, and even in their own hearings, the opposite of what their fan base believes, of what their cult believes, has been borne out to be the case. They simply are not operating in the real world. Just let them know that. Well, there have been too many victories for bigots who are in part running our country. These days are, for some, very much like the 1950s were. There is legislation that will be looked at in history books as example of the bigotry Americans had to endure in this era. A great example is this right here. The trans youth ban in Tennessee. This is from the Tennessee Lookout. Both House and Senate versions of a bill to ban health care providers from treating transgender minors with gender-affirming care took steps towards becoming law, passing handily in the Senate Judiciary Committee on Tuesday and the House Health Committee on Wednesday. The bill not only prohibits health care providers from treating transgender minors, it also sets up a system for reporting violations to the Tennessee Attorney General. It would also give parents of a person who commits suicide after receiving gender-affirming care, listen to this, the right to sue a physician who provided the care for up to 30 years after the teen reaches the age of 18. Up to 30 years. In other words, making it as easy as possible to intimidate physicians who are treating children. Treating children. SB 1, the bill is called, passed in judiciary on a party line vote of 7-2. Just remember, it is good to get as many Democrats as you can in any state. With Memphis Democratic Senators London Lamar and Sarah Kyle voting nay. Kyle raised questions about the state's role in legislating parental decisions on health care. You could talk to 100 different parents and hear 100 different ways to take care of a child, for a child. I might not agree with all of it, but it should not be a crime to disagree about the best way to care for our children, said Kyle, a Memphis Democrat. We're usually about parents' rights. The bill is taking away rights from parents. We should support the freedom of Tennesseans to decide their health care on their own, but this bill is saying government knows best. Do recall that once upon a time, conservatives said, I don't believe they ever meant what they said past the days of wearing Klan robes, but back in the day, conservatives did used to say they were for small government. Now this is what they are pushing. Of the 5 speakers testifying before the Senate committee, 4 opposed the bill, including Kathy Sinback, executive director of the ACLU of Tennessee. Sinback told lawmakers her organization is prepared to sue the state should the measure become law. Courts across the country have recognized that this type of legislation violates the equal protection and the due process rights of adolescents, their parents, and their doctors, Sinback said. This bill discriminates on the basis of transgender status and infringes on the fundamental rights of parents. For those reasons, it triggers the highest level of constitutional scrutiny, which means Tennessee will carry the burden of providing that this law advances important interests, and the state of Tennessee simply will not be able to prove that. She said no state has. Be warned, however. We have a bizarrely right-wing Supreme Court. Democrats have failed to pack the court. They haven't even addressed it as a remedy for our broken court system currently. That's a problem. That's a significant problem. So if this gets to the Supreme Court, don't expect legal reasoning to be the saving grace here. The House discussion, and let's get into the good let's get into the good part. We've got a video clip coming up on this. The House discussion on Wednesday featured pointed questioning by Democratic Representatives John Ray Clements, Bo Mitchell, and Caleb Hemmer of Matt Walsh, a right-wing podcast host, evil bigot, and writer for the Daily Wire, which is based in Nashville. I might have added one of those descriptors. In September, Walsh posted online edited videos of physicians at Vanderbilt University Medical Center's Clinic for Transgender Health and inaccurately claimed children are drugged and sterilized, among other false claims. Why? Why would he have to edit those videos so? Because they weren't saying what he needed them to in order to make a bigoted point. Walsh also hosted an October anti-transgender rally, the son of a, in Nashville that included as speakers Tennessee Senator Marsha Blackburn and State Senator Jack Johnson, who is sponsoring the Senate bill. So, folks, to be clear, this has passed already. And it's gonna hurt trans folks. It just is. At a minimum, it's going to give legitimacy to the idea that you can legislate against somebody based on their identity and not think of yourself as a bigot. Don't get it twisted. These people are all bigots. These are all people who would have been supporting separate water fountains 60 years ago. That's who these people are. It did give us one glorious gift, which is Matt Walsh getting grilled by the representatives from District 50, 55, and I think 59 out of Tennessee. Here they are.
Can you give us a summary of your educational background or your healthcare education?
I didn't go to college, but I did go to school long enough to learn how to read, so I can read the data for myself, and that's exactly what I've done.
And for what purpose do you conduct your research and use this brain of yours?
I use it for the purpose of trying to protect children from being castrated and mutilated.
You don't use it to get clicks?
Well, are you?
So Matt Walsh, significantly better at dodging these lasers, having a prepared answer for these obvious questions like, hey, aren't you unqualified? Because he's used to being asked, hey, aren't you unqualified to be saying the nonsense you're saying? Because he's unqualified to be saying the nonsense that he's saying. He's a con man. And, he cons bigoted people into doing awful things.
Using it right now to try to get clicks with this interaction?
If you're going to come before a committee and make mischaracterizations and misrepresentations, it's fair game for us to ask you your educational background.
Doesn't miss a beat. I love it.
You seem to have started this, so you have no medical background, correct?
No.
You're trying to address good public policy, correct?
Yes.
I just have to question, some of your public policy. Singapore is able to have nice things in part because they execute drug dealers by hanging and arrest even petty vandals and thieves and beat them with a cane until they bleed. We don't have nice things here because we aren't willing to do what is required to maintain them. I kind of have to question your public policy beliefs. And you also stated there'd been no studies. Well, I'm sitting here holding a study from the American Academy of Pediatrics, suicidal disparities between transgender and cisgender adults and children. Before you state things, you may need to know all the facts.
Just tearing him to bits and doing a hell of a good job, bringing the report out, doing the work. That is someone who's earning their paycheck. Good job, people in the Nashville area, for electing these folks.
Blog at about 16, you're an adult who's mature and can make decisions. You're that at 16. I don't care what anybody says, even going so far as to say when you're 16, you should be married and pregnant. 16 is an adult in your view. Why does this bill have minor defined as 18?
I was a radio host 13, 14 years ago in my early 20s. It's also not an accurate reflection of what I actually said. I was talking about the fact that people tended to marry young historically, and that's all that was about. How does that relate to this?
To all of a sudden act like this phenomenon of girls getting pregnant at a young age that we consider young, 16 or 17, to act like it's a new thing is ridiculous. It's always been that way. Girls between the ages of like 17 and 24 is when they're technically most fertile. Recently, in the last 30 years or so, we decided that's way too young to start a family. So what I'm saying is that the problem is not per se teenage pregnancy, it's unwed pregnancy. That's the problem in society.
So, you just don't get more satisfying than watching Matt Walsh get trashed in an official hearing. Oh, you love to see it. Well, what can you do about this? As far as the bill goes, as far as Matt Walsh's Comedy Central roast in the Tennessee, what was that, the House? Senate? Yeah. In Tennessee, you can tell those representatives that they did a good job. It's good to give encouragement to people who do well. And I assure you, they get all kinds of hate mail constantly from cultists. So a couple of voices saying, hey, I saw what you did and I liked it. It's going to go a long way. I have their Twitter handles in the description. Send them a tweet if you're on Twitter. As far as combating this bigoted bill, I would highly recommend, if you have the means, donate a couple of bucks to the ACLU. They have been fighting for free and decent lives for America for decades and decades. They are largely responsible for some of the decent things about America that we take for granted these days. It's because they fought the good fight. If you have a couple of spare bucks, if you're wondering what's the best I can do with this $10, $15, whatever, consider donating it to the ACLU. Because my God, they've earned it. And they're going to be the ones taking up this fight. I wish them luck. At the very least, they can do what Trump does and delay this. And hopefully things change between now and when there is no more delaying it. Like perhaps America comes to its senses. Valerie says, what else can I do to help you expand? Oh, you angel. Sharing the stream, liking, subscribing, and if you find yourself in the company of other folks that are progressive-minded, tell them to stop by at WYCD. I surely do appreciate growing the audience, and the more people we get on this channel, the more cool stuff we can do. I'm looking forward to those days, but I'm loving these days too, because it feels like we're starting something good. Andrew Woznicki says, tell your family and friends directly. Yes, sir. My man, thank you. Yes, indeed. Real Bill P says, good evening, folks. I was an eyewitness to that bigotry, and I'm sorry to hear that, Bill. But I am glad that it seems to me like America generally, since those days, has been going in the direction that you think is appropriate, and hopefully, with this new crop of people that have woken up to what is wrong with the country, hopefully, we will now get another massive shift in that direction. I will tell you, taking the temperature of America, in fact, part of the reason for the founding of this channel is the sense that simply we're not going to put up with injustice anymore, nor should we. It's about time we start taking the country back from bigots, from the greedy, from people who don't give a damn about little things like, oh, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, equality, justice for all. Hopefully, with people like you out there educating yourselves and working for the greater good, hopefully we will get to a place where America is living up to its promise. I believe it is possible, and I believe we're going to do it. It's going to be a hard fight, but hey, maybe we'll have some fun along the way. Well, I've been working on just a delightful video about the State of the Union and a character named Dark Brandon. I'm a fan of that guy. Also featuring the Majority Report and others. I hope you'll check it out when it goes up. In the meantime, thank you for joining me today. I hope you'll consider giving the stream a like and a subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have, thank you. And I'll see you next time. Oh, of course, I've been your old pal Jake, and this is WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can't Do. See you around.